What is going on, guys? Craig1287 here, bringing you yet another Battlefield 4 discussion video. Got some Battlefield 3 gameplay going on there in the background. Pretty fun round with the G3 on Metro. Definitely a matchup you don't really see that often, given all the close quarters. So, despite that, very fun round. Now let's get to the purpose of this video, and that is to discuss the recent article released on the Battlefield blog website, and that is the Road to Battlefield 4, the Ultimate Guide to the BF4 Vehicles, in which they talk about vehicles. Again, they give some discussion about personal choice and all the new customization that we can do for vehicles, and they talk about the test range real briefly. Nothing really all that great in there. And then we get to talk about the dynamic water-based combat, which definitely adds a lot. In one of the earlier articles that they did, they said that naval warfare wasn't all that great because it came down to whoever saw who first, pretty much, and shot first was the victor. But because of the dynamic water that we got going on now with all the waves, that equates to a lot more missed shots and just a lot of great more dynamic fights. That's not really what they discuss in this. That was kind of referencing an earlier article, but that's kind of what that section of the article is about, is the dynamic combat. And then they do go into some of the boat stuff more specifically. Not all that much detail was covered. They talk about the challenge in creating the naval combat, so that's actually a pretty interesting read, just to, when thinking about a game from a developer's perspective, the challenges of actually making a game. So that was a very interesting read, and as interesting how they talk about the transport chopper being a very big influence on the boats, in that with the transport chopper you have the two miniguns on the side, and that was a very big influence on how to get the more people to want to be in one of the boats. So that was actually pretty darn cool. And they do talk about how the limited options, in terms of the fact that boats are limited to being only in the water, you can't take them on ground, that was why they decided to give the boats a little more varied set of customization other than other vehicles. So you really can be very versatile in what you want to engage, depending upon whatever your choice be, rather than some of the other vehicles in the game. They have increased the amount of customization of all the vehicles, but it seems like the difference, anti-infantry, anti-armor, anti-air, that seems like what they're talking about in terms of versatility. So that is nice, that even though they're limited to just being in the water, that you've still got quite the slew of varied weapon choices. Then they start getting into, they talk about the whole rock, paper, scissors balance between vehicles and things like that. But they start getting into specific vehicle types. So they start talking about the mobile anti-air vehicle, which I love anti-air in BF3, and I'm sure I will love it just as much, if not more, in Battlefield 4. And it's actually a really interesting thing that they cover on. In BF3, there wasn't really any customization to the anti-air. I mean, you had the default gun was always the same, and then the rockets, well, they were always the lock-on rockets. You could get things like zoom and things like that, but you could never really change the rockets, and you definitely couldn't change in the primary the weapon that you would fire, the flak cannon or whatever it was. So this is what they said, is that so for Battlefield 4, in this case, we added more ammo options for the primary weapon slot and more types of AA missiles in the secondary weapon slot, each with their own strengths and weaknesses. Now we can fine-tune our loadout to gain an edge in different situations. Is it helicopters we'll encounter more, or jets? Is it long range or short range? Is there more cover for the aircraft on this map, or are they out in the open more often? So the biggest tweaks in the rock, paper, scissors gameplay come from what kinds of customization options are now available to each class. So basically, this is very cool. I'm thinking we'll see certain things that this bullet projectile maybe has flak to it to where it explodes, so you don't have to be as accurate, but its range is not as far, it doesn't shoot as fast, and maybe it doesn't deal as much damage. Or then you've got this other type of ammo type where it doesn't explode like flak, therefore you have to be more accurate, but it does travel further and the projectiles travel faster. So it's, you know, anybody can lead targets, but still, if you're shooting stuff way off in the distance that's flying really, really fast, these jets, you know, they change their paths really easily. So even if you are really good at leading your target, if the pilot you're shooting at is really good at just constantly changing your path, you'll never be able to shoot them, especially if it's a jet. So I'm really glad to see that we've got these two different option types, or not two, but potentially 2, 3, who knows, maybe even more. And it'll also be interesting to see the different type of AA missiles. Maybe some that lock on faster but deal less damage, or travel faster. You know, it'll be so nice once we get all these details as to the specifics. But so far, the potential definitely seems real awesome in customizing the AA a lot more than it was in Battlefield 3. Then they move on to helicopters, and not too much is stated. Or not the helicopters, sorry, the tanks, and they basically talk about all the different balances and in you know, getting shot in the front and things like that. They do say, I want to mention this real quick, a section about the gunner for the tank, and this is they state, additionally, like helicopter gunners in Battlefield 3, you know, the 50 cal gun that you could man on as a secondary. As like the passenger, you've got the tank remote gun stations now have their own optics slot, so you can customize whether it has zoom, which is what all the default gunner options had for Battlefield 3, or you can actually do other optics slots, and an upgrade slot, including functions like laser designator and short-range incendiary grenades. So first, laser designator, that's pretty much what the third seat was for the tanks. That's cool. Kind of bummed that there's no longer a third seat, but you know, having the ability to laser designate stuff is pretty nice to have for the gunner. But that second part that they say, short-range incendiary grenades, that is going to be awesome. You know, for some of those large open maps, you're going to want the standard gun that you've got. But for those urban maps where you've got a whole lot of, you know, just you're next to buildings constantly, and people are always going to be, especially now that you've got two classes that have C4, you've got the recon class that has C4 again, there's going to be a lot of people trying to C4 tanks. So if you're the gunner, having this short-range incendiary grenade is going to be amazingly handy as a gunner. This is going to really help out the tank gunners in their survival. Then they start to move on into talking about the critical hit. Now this is pretty much their direct response to wave vehicles being disabled. Not a lot of people were ecstatic about the whole disabled mechanic, and they actually give some pretty legit reasons. They definitely heard the community as to why people didn't like it. And so they go into talking about this critical hit mechanic. Anytime a vehicle takes a hit, we check the amount of final damage that was dealt after the angle and the zone checks. If the damage was high enough, it is considered a critical hit. And the vehicle acts much like they did in Battlefield 3 in terms of the disable, losing power and having loss of control for aircraft, but this effect is now temporary, and the vehicle recovers automatically after a few seconds. So how long this will take, it'll be interesting. And if it's similar to like when you're being suppressed as an infantry, as long as you're suppressed, your health doesn't start to regenerate. Is that going to be how it is for this? Even if it's like something like M203 or the the underbarrel grenade launchers or frag grenades, are simple explosive things like that going to slow and is it going to slow that process down? That will be interesting, but I think this will end up working out better because, as they state in the article, a lot of times people got in a vehicle, it would get disabled, and they'd bail out instantly because, well, the fear of dying. But even if they came out on top and end up winning, they're still stuck in a disabled vehicle unless they're an engineer, especially an engineer that has a repair tool. A lot of times I was an engineer in a tank, and I had mines because I liked to be more anti-tank than tank defensive. So that right there is pretty darn interesting. I think it'll work out for the best. It's a nice middle ground between Battlefield 2 and Battlefield 3. So very interesting. And then moving on, we've got a next section that talks about the new critical hit zone. You know how with the tanks you get shot in the rear, you take a lot of damage. You get shot in the sides, you take a decent amount of damage. Front shots you do very little damage. Well, they've now added a top zone to the combat-oriented tanks, which takes into account also the angle of impact. So something like javelin missiles, you know, they're going to be doing massive amounts of damage to that top zone, and vehicle-based laser-guided missiles, they'll be doing massive amounts of damage to those top zones. But if you're getting up top of roofs, you know, that'll really help, even if you're using dumbfire RPG rockets. So that's pretty darn cool, especially if you're paradropping, if you're, you know, parachuting in. Get those top shots, and it'll do pretty good amount of damage. I doubt it'll be as much as a rear shot, but it is nice to see yet another zone that you can get those damage. So even if they're facing you, as long as you're above them on a rooftop, you'll be able to get you know, some critical hits in there. And then finally, they start to talk about fighter jets and attack jets. Now, this section didn't really appeal to me too much because I think in Battlefield 3 right now, out of my hundreds of hours played, I think I have 2 jet kills, and I don't even know how I got those. But still an interesting read. You know, you got to understand your enemy, so that's why I read this anyways, and it's still a pretty interesting thing that they're doing, a pretty interesting approach. They talk about how in Battlefield 3, fighter jets and attack jets were fairly homogeneous and shared the same unlocks. They are both practically the same class with few differences. In Battlefield 4, we've updated the fighter jet class to now the stealth jet, with two new vehicles not present in Battlefield 4, one of these including the Chinese J-20. And their customization options now focus on air-to-air fighting. So that's for these stealth jets, which used to be fighter jets. And now attack jets have their own set of unlocks, which focus on air-to-ground capabilities. So that's really cool that they've added a lot more specificity to what each one will want to focus on. Obviously, you know, they're not going to be totally unique, and, you know, fighter jets, or now stealth jets, will still be able to do damage to the ground, and vice versa. For the attack jet, they can still attack air, but it's nice to see that each one focuses on a specific area. So those are just some of the highlights of the article, some of the things that stuck out as being, you know, not shocking, but you know, some new information that we haven't really heard specifics on yet. So what do you guys think about the vehicles in Battlefield 4? It definitely, for me, seems like things are going to be much more balanced. I'm interested in a lot of these changes. I guess 90% of these changes I really approve of. The other 10%, it's not that I disapprove, it's just it's kind of a wait and see. We'll just have to see how things work out. And yeah, I am excited for Battlefield 4, even as primarily an infantry player. I think a lot of these vehicle changes are good. So what do you guys think? And I hope that you have enjoyed the gameplay there in the background and have enjoyed this discussion. And if you got the time, go check out the article. I've got a link to it in the video description below. Have a good one. Ta-ta.